Sophia always believed she had a simple, happy life with her adoptive mother, Helena. But everything changes when a single object, a delicate necklace, unveils a shocking connection to a family she never knew. What begins as a promising job interview quickly spirals into a journey of secrets, betrayal, and heartbreaking revelations. As Sophia uncovers the truth, she learns that her biological mother, Elena, was torn from her life by Helena and a man consumed by jealousy and anger. Held captive and manipulated, Elena lost everything, including her sanity, and spent years wandering the streets, broken and alone. With the help of Henry, Sophia's biological grandfather, she fights to reclaim not only her life, but also the relationship with the daughter she thought she had lost forever. Meanwhile, Helena's actions come to light, and she must face the consequences of her choices. For Sophia, the journey is one of reconciliation, balancing her love for the woman who raised her with the pain of the truth about her origins. Along the way, she discovers the strength of her mother Elena, the love of her late father Matthew, and the enduring bond of a family shattered but not destroyed. Broken Bonds, The Truth That Heals is a gripping tale of betrayal, redemption, and the unbreakable power of love. Will Sophia and Elena be able to heal from the wounds of the past? Will the truth set them free, or tear them apart forever? Sophia woke up early as she always did, but the morning carried an unshakable weight of significance. It wasn't just the usual anticipation of the day ahead. It was a feeling that her life was teetering on the edge of something transformative. Today wasn't just about an interview. It was about proving to herself and the world that she belonged among the best. At 25, Sophia had fought hard for every inch of progress she'd made, from juggling school and part-time jobs to overcoming challenges that would have crushed someone with less resolve. This opportunity at Torres Global, one of the city's most prestigious firms, was her shot at not only stability but also the future she had long envisioned. Behind her grit and determination stood Helena, her adoptive mother, a woman who had given her everything she needed to believe in herself even when the odds seemed impossible. The morning sunlight spilled into her small room, painting the walls in soft hues of gold. Sophia sat on the edge of her bed, her reflection staring back at her from the modest vanity in the corner. Her almond-brown eyes held determination, but they couldn't fully mask the nervous flicker beneath the surface. She brushed a strand of dark hair behind her ear and took a deep breath. This is it, she thought, a mantra of reassurance she repeated to herself like a silent prayer. Everything was ready: her neatly pressed blazer, the portfolio of carefully prepared documents, her mental rehearsal of every possible question they might ask. But something still felt incomplete, like she needed a final piece to fortify her confidence. Her gaze shifted to the old wooden box perched high on her closet shelf. The box was a relic of Helena's past, filled with keepsakes Sophia had never quite taken the time to explore. On impulse, she retrieved it, her fingers grazing its worn surface as she opened it with care. Inside was a treasure trove of memories: faded black and white photographs, pressed flowers from long-forgotten summers, and trinkets that seemed to carry whispers of stories she would never fully know. But it was the necklace that caught her attention, a delicate silver chain with a sapphire pendant that shimmered like a piece of the sky. Sophia had seen it before, admired it even, but she'd never felt it was hers to wear. It had always seemed too precious, too tied to Helena's life before Sophia entered it. Yet, today it felt different. The pendant seemed to glow in the morning light, its sapphire catching and reflecting the brilliance of the sun. She held it in her hands for a moment, feeling its cool weight and the quiet significance it seemed to carry. As she clasped it around her neck, a surge of calm strength washed over her, as if the necklace was lending her some unspoken power. It rested just above her heart, a symbol of all the sacrifices, love, and encouragement that had brought her to this moment. Turning back to the mirror, she saw a different version of herself, stronger, more composed, and ready for the challenges ahead. The necklace wasn't just an accessory. It was a connection to her past and a reminder of the future she was building. It grounded her, infused her with courage, and made her feel like she wasn't facing this day alone. Bag in hand, she stepped out the door with a determination so fierce it felt as though the city itself couldn't stand in her way. Today, Sophia wasn't just chasing an opportunity. She was claiming the life she had always known was meant to be hers. With each of Sophia's answers, Mr. Torres's expression grew more intense. His piercing gaze seemed to dissect every word she said, searching for something she couldn't yet comprehend. "You mentioned you were adopted," he asked, his tone shifting from formal to urgent. "And you've never known your biological parents?" Sophia nodded, her unease growing with each passing second. The room, which moments ago felt professional and structured, now carried a palpable tension. There was something in Mr. Torres's demeanor, a mix of urgency, hope, and pain, that left her questioning the very nature of this meeting. "No, sir," Sophia replied, her voice steady but uncertain. "I've always known I was adopted. Helena, my mother, told me my biological parents couldn't raise me because of personal challenges. That's all I've ever been told." Mr. Torres's eyes remained locked on the sapphire pendant hanging from her neck. He leaned back in his chair, exhaling deeply as if her words had confirmed something he had long feared. Rising abruptly, he moved toward the expansive glass window overlooking the city, his hands clasped behind his back as he tried to compose himself. "Sophia," he began, his voice softer now but still carrying an undercurrent of urgency. "That necklace. It isn't just a random piece of jewelry. It belonged to my daughter, Elena. I gave it to her on her 18th birthday. She disappeared 22 years ago, and until today, I never thought I'd see that necklace again." His words hit Sophia like a bolt of lightning. She sat frozen, her mind struggling to reconcile this revelation. The pendant she had thought was a simple family heirloom had suddenly become the centerpiece of a mystery she hadn't even known existed. The atmosphere in the room felt charged with unspoken possibilities. "You need to help me understand how that necklace came to be in your possession," Mr. Torres continued, his voice trembling slightly. This can't just be a coincidence." Sophia nodded slowly, still processing what he had just said. Her calm, predictable life had been upended in an instant. What had started as a routine job interview now felt like the first chapter of a story that could redefine everything she thought she knew about herself. The interview ended abruptly. Mr. Torres, clearly shaken, asked Sophia to keep the details of their conversation and the necklace private for now. He needed time to investigate, he explained, and he promised to reach out soon. As she walked out of the office building, Sophia felt a whirlwind of emotions. Confusion, curiosity, and fear churned within her as she clutched the necklace instinctively. Whatever lay ahead, she knew her life had already begun to change in ways she couldn't yet understand. Returning home, Sophia found Helena in the kitchen, humming softly as she prepared dinner. The familiar scene was comforting, but Sophia's mind was far from calm. "Mom," she began, her tone unusually serious, "we need to talk about this necklace." Helena turned, her face softening as she saw her daughter, but the warmth in her expression faltered when she noticed the pendant still around Sophia's neck. "What about it?" Helena asked, her voice casual, but her eyes betrayed a flicker of unease. "Mr. Torres said this necklace belonged to his daughter, Elena, who disappeared over 2 decades ago. He recognized it immediately." Sophia's voice was steady, but inside, she was grappling with the weight of what she had learned. "I didn't know this necklace carried such a history. I need to understand how it came to us." Helena's hand stilled, the spoon in her hand suspended mid-air as she processed Sophia's words. Slowly, she placed the spoon down and turned to face her daughter fully. "It must be a mistake," Helena said finally, her voice carefully measured. "There are probably dozens of necklaces like that one. It's not uncommon." But her eyes darted away, and her hand trembled slightly as she picked up the spoon again, stirring aimlessly. Sophia's gaze narrowed. There was something in Helena's tone, a hesitation, an unfamiliar edge, that made her question if her mother was telling the whole truth. Sophia couldn't shake the feeling that Helena was hiding something. Her attempts to press for answers were met with abrupt changes in subject, leaving the conversation unresolved and her frustration mounting. For the first time in her life, Sophia felt a crack in the unwavering trust she had in the woman who had raised her. Meanwhile, Mr. Torres, unable to dismiss the significance of the necklace, was consumed by the possibility that Sophia might be connected to his missing daughter, Elena. He moved swiftly, enlisting the help of Raphael, a seasoned private investigator known for unraveling complex and delicate cases. Raphael wasted no time diving into Helena's past. It didn't take long for him to uncover irregularities in Sophia's adoption. The process appeared to have been handled privately, bypassing the usual legal procedures, with sparse documentation to legitimize it. This raised immediate red flags for Raphael, who had seen similar cases before, situations where the truth was deliberately concealed. The details hinted at a deeper, more troubling story, one that seemed tied to Sophia's origins and the necklace that had brought everything to light. Raphael's investigation also led him to Helena's past relationships, particularly with a man named Marco. Marco, an ex-boyfriend of Helena, was known for his volatile personality and entanglements with questionable individuals. Their relationship, though long over, was marked by tumultuous episodes that left lingering shadows. Raphael's inquiries revealed that Marco had recently reappeared in Helena's life, reaching out through messages and attempting to arrange meetings. There was clearly more to their connection than mere nostalgia. Raphael couldn't yet piece together the full puzzle, but he sensed that Marco held a key to understanding what Helena might be hiding. Back at home, Sophia couldn't ignore the growing tension. Helena had become more withdrawn, avoiding eye contact and retreating into long silences. Sophia felt like a stranger in her own home, haunted by unanswered questions and Helena's increasingly strange behavior. Desperate for clarity, she decided to confront her mother again, but every attempt was met with resistance. The more Sophia pushed, the more Helena seemed to retreat into a shell of paranoia and fear. One night, Sophia overheard Helena speaking in hushed tones on the phone. Standing outside her mother's bedroom, she strained to hear the muffled conversation. "Marco, this is getting out of hand," Helena whispered, her voice trembling. "They're digging too deep. I told you this was dangerous. You promised me it would stay in the past." Sophia froze, her heart pounding. Who was Marco, and why was Helena so desperate to keep something buried? The urgency and fear in her mother's voice hinted at a secret far darker than anything Sophia could have imagined. The following days were marked by an icy distance between them. Sophia felt a growing rift, not just in their relationship, but in her sense of reality. The woman who had always been her anchor now seemed like a stranger, shrouded in secrecy. Meanwhile, Raphael's investigation into Marco revealed troubling connections. Marco had ties to individuals linked to shady dealings, and his renewed interest in Helena coincided with the time frame of Sophia's adoption. Raphael began piecing together a timeline that pointed to a hidden truth about what had happened 22 years ago, one that involved Helena, Marco, and a past that refused to stay buried. The connection between Helena and Marco, once thought to be a fleeting romance, now revealed itself as something far darker and more intricate. Raphael's investigation uncovered layers of deceit and possible criminal activity that reshaped the narrative entirely. When Mr. Torres learned of these findings, his worst fears began to solidify into a sinister reality. Helena's ties to Marco, a man with a volatile history and questionable associations, made it clear that Sophia's adoption wasn't just irregular. It was part of a deliberate and possibly malicious scheme. Mr. Torres couldn't shake the suspicion that Sophia was indeed his granddaughter and that Elena's disappearance was the result of something far more sinister than a simple accident or tragedy. Sophia could feel the tension tightening around her like an invisible net. The truth seemed agonizingly close, yet always just out of reach. Her heart ached with the thought that her life, once filled with love and certainty, might have been built on lies. Confronting Helena now felt inevitable, but the thought of shattering their bond filled her with dread. She wasn't prepared for how deeply these revelations would cut into her life, nor how far-reaching their impact would be on those around her. Helena had always been Sophia's rock, the one person she trusted without question. Her unwavering support had been the foundation of Sophia's identity, but Raphael's discoveries chipped away at that image, exposing a complex and troubling past. Helena's outwardly nurturing demeanor concealed years of envy, impulsive choices, and suppressed anger, all of which had shaped the fates of everyone entangled in her life. Raphael's meticulous research began to piece together a tangled web of history, one rooted in Helena's long and complicated relationship with Elena and Marco. Helena and Elena had been childhood friends, their bond fractured by an unspoken rivalry. Elena's natural charisma and beauty made her the center of attention, leaving Helena feeling overshadowed and invisible. The tension between them escalated when Marco and his twin brother, Miguel, entered their lives. Miguel was everything Marco was not: calm, reliable, and inherently kind. While Marco was fiery and impulsive, Miguel exuded stability. Helena became involved with Marco, but their relationship was turbulent from the start, as Marco's affections increasingly shifted toward Elena. This betrayal ignited a deep well of resentment in Helena, who felt humiliated and discarded. The situation worsened when Miguel and Elena began a relationship, a love so pure that it only intensified Marco's jealousy and Helena's bitterness. When Elena discovered she was pregnant with Miguel's child, their happiness was palpable. But tragedy struck just weeks later when Miguel was killed in a car accident, leaving Elena shattered. Her grief consumed her, and in her vulnerable state, Helena and Marco seized an opportunity that would irrevocably alter all their lives. Driven by a warped sense of righteousness and jealousy, Helena convinced Marco that Elena was unfit to care for the child. In Helena's mind, taking the baby wasn't just an act of revenge. It was a way to save the child and claim a part of the life she felt was stolen from her. Marco, devastated by his brother's death and fueled by jealousy, agreed to Helena's plan. On a stormy night, the two carried out their scheme, abducting Elena and taking her to a secluded location. Elena was held against her will, her protests silenced by their warped justifications. Raphael's investigation revealed that Marco's involvement wasn't purely out of malice. His emotions were complicated by guilt, grief, and a misplaced sense of loyalty to Helena. Helena, in a rare moment of vulnerability during an intense questioning session with Raphael, admitted that the kidnapping was never meant to harm Elena. "I thought I was protecting her, protecting the baby," Helena confessed, her voice trembling. But her reasoning did little to absolve the gravity of her actions. The truth of that fateful night remained incomplete, but it was enough to send shockwaves through everyone involved. According to Helena, her actions had always been driven by a misguided sense of protection. She insisted that her goal was to safeguard Sophia, believing Elena, consumed by grief and spiraling into despair, was incapable of being a mother. But the trauma of the kidnapping, coupled with the relentless manipulation by Helena and Marco, pushed Elena into a devastating mental collapse. Stripped of her autonomy and subjected to unbearable pressure, she lost her grip on reality, eventually disappearing into the shadows of the streets. There, she lived in isolation, her once bright future reduced to obscurity and oblivion. "I never wanted her to vanish like that," Helena sobbed during a private confession to Raphael. Tears streamed down her face as she tried to justify the choices she had made decades earlier. "I thought I was protecting Sophia. Elena was unstable. I only wanted to make sure the baby was safe, that she'd have a good life. Everything I did for Sophia." Raphael, unmoved by Helena's attempts to rationalize her actions, understood the gravity of her choices. The line between protection and control had been obliterated, leaving behind a trail of pain and destruction. Her motivations, while cloaked in concern, stemmed as much from jealousy and resentment as from any maternal instinct. Helena's decisions weren't just the desperate acts of a woman trying to preserve order. They were the calculated moves of someone who had long believed she could dictate the lives of others. For Sophia, the revelation was shattering. The woman she had always looked up to as her protector and guide was now exposed as the architect of a web of lies that had destroyed her biological mother's life. The knowledge that Marco, her biological father's twin, had been a willing accomplice only deepened her confusion and heartbreak. The roots of her identity felt tangled in a history she could barely comprehend, leaving her questioning who she truly was and where she belonged. Helena, while not yet formally charged, was placed under house arrest as the investigation unfolded. The home that had once been Sophia's sanctuary now felt more like a prison, for both of them. Under constant surveillance, Helena was confined to her own walls, forbidden from leaving even for the smallest tasks. The house, once filled with warmth and memories, became a cold reminder of her choices and the lives she had irrevocably altered. Desperate to mend the growing rift between them, Helena sought out Sophia, pleading for understanding. "Sophia, please, listen to me. Everything I did for you. You have to believe me. Elena, she wasn't well. She couldn't have raised you the way I did. I gave you a life she never could have." Her voice cracked with desperation, but the words only deepened Sophia's pain. Sophia turned to her face streaked with tears of anger and betrayal. "You destroyed her life, Helena. Don't call this love. It wasn't love, it was selfishness. You took everything from her, from me, and decided it was your right to choose how our lives should be. And now we're all paying the price." The confrontation left the air in the house heavy with unspoken pain. Sophia wrestled with the conflict between the love and gratitude she had always felt for Helena and the harsh truth of the woman's actions. The bond that had once been unbreakable now felt fragile and strained, teetering under the weight of betrayal. While Helena endured her confinement, Sophia struggled to navigate the swirling storm of anger, sadness, and the bittersweet memories of a life she thought she understood. Daniel continued his relentless investigation, piecing together the harrowing truth of what had happened to Elena. Each revelation was a blow, exposing the depth of the psychological manipulation and cruelty inflicted upon her. Helena, confined to her home under house arrest, began to crumble under the weight of her actions. The isolation she now faced mirrored the torment she had inflicted on Elena, and for the first time, she seemed to feel the suffocating consequences of her decisions. Meanwhile, Sophia tried to find strength in the chaos, determined to reclaim her identity from the shards of lies and pain that had shaped her life. The road ahead was daunting, but Sophia understood that the truth, no matter how devastating, was her only path to freedom and healing. Daniel uncovered chilling details about Helena's methods. She had manipulated Elena with calculated psychological tactics, preying on her grief and vulnerability after Miguel's death. Helena had worked to convince Elena that her captivity was her own fault, planting seeds of guilt and self-doubt. She repeatedly reinforced the lie that no one cared for Elena, isolating her emotionally while maintaining the facade that she was Elena's only ally. Over time, this insidious brainwashing broke Elena's spirit, leaving her lost in a fog of despair and disconnected from reality. For over a year, Elena was held captive with no contact with the outside world, no hope of rescue, and no way to fight back. Helena maintained a dominating presence, justifying her actions as necessary for the baby's safety. Marco, ever the volatile figure, served as an enforcer, his menacing presence ensuring that Elena remained trapped in her psychological and physical prison. The emotional abuse and isolation left Elena mentally shattered, her resilience eroded with each passing day. When the time finally came for Elena to give birth, the conditions were horrific. She delivered her baby without medical assistance, in a state of extreme physical and emotional vulnerability. As soon as the child was born, Helena claimed the baby as her own, fulfilling her twisted justification for all that had transpired. For Helena, this was the culmination of her protective mission, but for Elena, it was the final blow. The loss of her baby broke through her haze of manipulation, and in a desperate bid for freedom, she managed to escape. Weak, confused, and mentally fractured, Elena fled into the night. She wandered aimlessly, her memories fragmented and her sense of self obliterated. With no support system and no one to turn to, she ended up on the streets, her once vibrant spirit reduced to a shadow. She became invisible, a lost soul unrecognizable even to herself. The woman who had once been the light in so many lives was now swallowed by darkness, a victim of manipulation and neglect. The aftermath of Helena's actions was devastating. By taking Sophia and raising her as her own, Helena not only robbed Elena of her chance to be a mother, but also destroyed any hope of a life free from torment. Sophia, now armed with the painful truth, was consumed by a deep rage and sorrow. Her existence was inextricably linked to the destruction of her biological mother's life, and the betrayal she felt from Helena, the woman she had called her mother, was overwhelming. Helena, still under house arrest, lived in a state of perpetual guilt and remorse. She was forbidden from leaving her home except for essential appointments and barred from contacting Elena, who remained under medical care as efforts were made to stabilize her mental health. For Helena, her home, once a place of love and control, had become a prison, both physical and emotional. The weight of her decisions bore down on her every moment, a constant reminder of the lives she had shattered. Meanwhile, Sophia faced the monumental task of reconciling her love for Helena with the horrifying truth of what she had done. The woman who had cared for her and shaped her childhood was the same person responsible for robbing her biological mother of everything. The shadow of Helena's lies loomed over Sophia's journey, but she knew she had to keep moving forward. The promise of justice, however incomplete, was the only thread keeping her grounded as she worked to rebuild her identity from the ashes of her past. The house, once a sanctuary for Helena and Sophia, had become a suffocating prison, mirroring the emotional confinement Helena had imposed on Elena for so many years. The walls that had sheltered laughter and memories now reverberated with tension, regret, and the weight of betrayal. For Helena, the greatest punishment wasn't the legal restrictions she now faced, it was the devastation in Sophia's eyes. The young woman who had once called her mother with unshakable love now looked at her as a stranger, a symbol of everything that had been stolen. Sophia wrestled with the paradox of cherishing the woman who had nurtured her while grappling with the cruel truth of how that relationship was forged. Elena, meanwhile, remained lost, living on the fringes of society, a ghost of the vibrant woman she once was. For Sophia, the truth about the kidnapping and her biological mother's suffering was like a wound that refused to heal, exposing the depth of the scars left by Helena and Marco. The young woman understood that moving forward meant facing this painful reality, even if it meant tearing apart the foundation of her identity. Justice, redemption, and healing became a shared, inescapable journey for everyone involved. A path fraught with challenges, but one they could no longer avoid. For Henry, The pain of losing Elena had been a constant shadow over his life. 2 decades of searching, hoping, and enduring had left him worn but resolute. Despite every setback, he refused to give up on finding his daughter, even when it seemed the world had long given up on her. That unrelenting hope finally bore fruit when Raphael uncovered a crucial lead: a woman living on the streets in a nearby city, whose description bore a faint resemblance to the vibrant young woman Henry once knew. Henry arrived at the location with a mixture of dread and hope, his heart pounding as he approached a small, decrepit square. Sitting in a shadowed corner was a figure hunched over, surrounded by tattered bags and scattered belongings. Her hair was matted, her face lined with years of hardship, and her frail body barely seemed capable of holding itself upright. But despite the ravages of time and suffering, Henry knew in an instant it was Elena. He knelt before her, his tears falling freely as he struggled to find the words he had waited so long to say. "Elena, it's me. It's your father." His voice trembled with emotion, breaking under the weight of 2 decades of silence. But as his words reached her, Elena's empty, distant eyes showed no sign of recognition. Her gaze passed over him, unfocused and lost, as if he were just another stranger in her fragmented world. Henry's heart broke at the sight, but he refused to let go. With gentle hands, he embraced her, whispering promises of safety and love. She remained stiff and unresponsive, but Henry knew this was only the beginning. With Raphael's help, Henry arranged for Elena to be transported to a specialized trauma clinic, where a team of experts immediately began her treatment. Diagnosed with severe post-traumatic stress disorder and other mental health conditions stemming from years of abuse and neglect, Elena's recovery was projected to be long and uncertain. The initial days in the clinic were grueling. Elena was frequently agitated, lost in hallucinations and delusions that blurred the lines between her memories and reality. She flinched at the touch of strangers and muttered incoherent fragments of her past, her mind trapped in a loop of fear and confusion. Despite the challenges, Henry visited her every day without fail. He would sit by her bedside, holding her hand gently, even when she recoiled or failed to recognize him. "It's okay, my darling," he would whisper, his voice steady despite the ache in his chest. "I'm here now. You're not alone anymore. I'll stay as long as it takes." Henry's unwavering presence became a small beacon of hope in Elena's shattered world. Though progress was slow, glimmers of recognition occasionally flickered in her eyes, a brief meeting of their gazes or a faint reaction to the sound of his voice. Each moment, no matter how fleeting, strengthened Henry's resolve. He believed that somehow, his love and persistence could help guide Elena back from the darkness that had consumed her for so long. As the weeks passed, Juliana's time at the clinic brought glimmers of hope. Under the intensive care of a skilled medical team, small moments of clarity began to emerge. Her fragmented mind started to mend itself, offering brief but significant flashes of her life before the nightmare of the kidnapping. Henry watched her progress with a bittersweet mixture of joy and sorrow. Each step forward meant a piece of her past was returning, but those memories were often laden with pain and trauma. One quiet afternoon, as Henry sat by Juliana's bedside, she turned to him with an intensity in her eyes he hadn't seen in years. Gripping his hand tightly, she asked in a trembling voice, "Dad, Matthew, where is Matthew?" The name fell from her lips like a fragile thread, pulling her back to her former life. Henry's heart clenched, and his throat tightened as he prepared to deliver the truth that had haunted them both for so long. With tears in his eyes, Henry recounted the story of Matthew's tragic car accident. He spoke softly, pausing as his voice faltered under the weight of old grief. Juliana listened, her face pale as tears streamed down her cheeks. Memories of Matthew flooded back, the man who had been her love, her hope, her future. She remembered their plans, the joy they felt upon learning of her pregnancy, and the devastating pain of losing him so suddenly. Her sobs filled the room as Henry held her hand, his own tears falling silently. It was a heartbreaking moment, but also a vital step in her healing process. Over time, Juliana began to piece together more of her past. Memories of Margaret and David surfaced, distorted by fear and anger. She recalled Margaret's manipulative words, the lies that had kept her captive, and the psychological torment she endured. The fragmented puzzle of her suffering started to take shape, revealing the full extent of what had been done to her. Juliana resolved to confront the past, drawing strength from Henry's unwavering presence. Though the journey ahead was long, she was no longer alone. As her mind cleared, Juliana began preparing for another step in her recovery. Meeting Luana, the daughter she had lost before ever truly knowing. The thought of reuniting with Luana was overwhelming, but it also gave her a new sense of purpose. She clung to the hope that their meeting could begin to mend what had been broken. Meanwhile, Daniel's relentless investigation finally reached its climax. After months of tireless work, he amassed undeniable evidence that exposed the full truth about Juliana's kidnapping and Luana's abduction. The case left no room for Margaret and David to evade responsibility. When the authorities moved in, Margaret was brought to the police station, looking weary and defeated. Her house arrest had left her a shadow of the controlling figure she once was. David, found hiding on a remote farm, was arrested the same day. The reunion of the two conspirators at the station set the stage for a long-awaited reckoning. In the interrogation room, Margaret sat across from the investigators, visibly worn down. The weight of her actions was etched on her face, her once steely demeanor now replaced with the exhaustion of a life built on lies. From the other side of the glass, Henry and Luana watched in tense silence, their emotions swirling as the confrontation unfolded. Margaret hesitated at first, clinging to her fractured justifications, but the mounting evidence, photos, documents, and witness accounts, left no room for denial. Under the pressure of direct questioning, she finally broke down. Margaret began to speak, her voice trembling as she faced the weight of her actions. The room was thick with tension, the air heavy with the unspoken pain of everyone present. Tears streamed down Margaret's face as she recounted her crimes, her words filled with guilt yet tainted by attempts to justify the unjustifiable. "I kidnapped Juliana with David's help," she admitted, her voice cracking under the pressure. "We kept her captive for over a year. But I swear, I did it to protect Luana, to give her a life that Juliana couldn't." She paused, trying to find strength to continue. Juliana was so broken, so lost in her grief. "I thought she couldn't care for a baby. I thought I was saving her, saving Luana." Her reasoning, however, fell flat in the cold reality of the interrogation room. Margaret's plea for understanding sounded hollow, even to her own ears. From the other side of the glass, Henry stood frozen, his fists clenched at his sides, his jaw tight with restrained fury. Beside him, Luana stared in disbelief, her face pale and her eyes brimming with unshed tears. Margaret's words, meant to frame her actions as acts of love, instead felt like a cruel insult in light of the suffering she had caused. Unable to remain silent any longer, Henry pushed open the door to the interrogation room, Luana hesitating briefly before following him. He stood across from Margaret, his presence commanding, his pain palpable. "Do you call this protection?" Henry demanded, his voice steady but trembling with suppressed emotion. His gaze bore into Margaret as though willing her to understand the devastation she had caused. "You destroyed lives, Margaret. You didn't protect anyone. You took Juliana from me, from Luana. You stole her chance to be a mother. You didn't act out of love. This wasn't protection. It was control. It was selfishness. You wanted to play God with people's lives, and now we're all here, picking up the pieces of the wreckage you created." Margaret tried to speak, but her voice faltered under the weight of Henry's words. The wall she had built around her guilt crumbled, and she broke down into silent sobs, her tears streaming onto the table before her. But even in her remorse, there was no solace for the damage she had wrought. Meanwhile, in another room, David sat stiffly, his demeanor combative as investigators questioned him. At first, he maintained his defiance, denying involvement and blaming others. But as the evidence mounted and the pressure intensified, he cracked. His confession came in bursts of anger and bitterness, a toxic mix of resentment and regret. "I loved Juliana," David shouted, his voice shaking with raw emotion. "But I was nothing to her. Nothing. She chose Matthew. Always Matthew. Even after he was gone, I was still invisible. She only cared about him and that child. The child that should have been mine." David's voice rose, his words spilling out in a torrent of misplaced anger and jealousy. "When Matthew died, I thought maybe, just maybe, she'd see me. That she'd need me. But she didn't. She never did. She just mourned him, as if I didn't even exist." His confession grew more erratic as he recounted the twisted motivations behind his role in Juliana's captivity. "Keeping her there, making her rely on me, I thought it would change things," he admitted, his voice cracking as his bravado dissolved. "But it didn't. Nothing was enough for her. Nothing ever was. And I David stopped mid-sentence, his anger giving way to a hollow realization. His words, meant to justify his actions, only underscored the depth of his cruelty and the devastation he had wrought. When the confessions concluded, the authorities acted swiftly. Margaret and David were formally arrested and charged with multiple crimes, including kidnapping, psychological abuse, physical abuse, and illegal adoption. As they were led away in handcuffs, their faces reflected the weight of justice finally catching up to them. For Henry and Luana, watching their captors taken away offered a bittersweet sense of closure. It marked the end of one chapter, but the wounds left by Margaret and David's actions would take much longer to heal. Together, Henry and Luana turned away from the interrogation room, ready to face the next steps in rebuilding their lives and, one day, reuniting with Juliana. The scenes of the arrests were charged with emotion and an overwhelming sense of finality. Margaret, her hands cuffed tightly behind her back, walked with her head bowed, the weight of her guilt evident in her defeated posture. Tears brimmed in her eyes, but she said nothing except for a faint, trembling whisper as she passed Luana. "Luana, forgive me." Her voice was barely audible over the commotion in the police station, a plea lost in the noise. Luana, standing frozen in place, did not respond. Her face was streaked with tears, her chest heaving with the weight of emotions she couldn't yet process. Watching Margaret, the woman who had raised her, be led away like a criminal was shattering. Luana's love for Margaret warred with a revulsion for the unforgivable actions she had committed. How could she reconcile the caring mother who had nurtured her with the woman who had stolen her from her true mother? The conflict tore at her heart, leaving her in silent agony. Forgiveness felt unreachable, a mountain she wasn't sure she could ever climb. David, meanwhile, maintained a defiant glare as the police escorted him out of the building. His face was a mask of frustration and simmering anger, as if he were unwilling to accept the gravity of his fate. He struggled against the officers, hurling venomous glares at everyone around him, but his resistance only reinforced the truth of his guilt. For those watching, it was clear that David's arrest carried none of the remorse that Margaret displayed, only bitterness and blame. As Margaret and David faced the legal consequences of their actions, Luana stood at a crossroads. The truth, though finally unveiled, had left deep scars that would not fade quickly. She realized that her next steps would define her future, but the path forward seemed daunting. Could she forgive Margaret for everything that had been taken from her? Could she rebuild her sense of self and identity in the wake of so many revelations? These questions lingered like shadows, heavy and unanswerable for now. While Luana wrestled with her emotions, Juliana continued her treatment at the clinic. With each passing day, her memories grew sharper, and her mind, though still fragile, began to reclaim the fragments of her stolen life. Henry remained by her side, steadfast in his support, while the doctors carefully guided her through the complex recovery process. Each small victory, a coherent memory, a moment of clarity, felt monumental, a step closer to reclaiming the person Juliana had once been. One quiet afternoon, Juliana requested to see Luana alone. The two women sat together in the clinic's garden, a small, serene space where the sunlight filtered gently through the trees. Juliana's hands trembled slightly as she took Luana's in hers, her gaze tender and filled with emotion. For a long moment, she said nothing, as if trying to summon the courage to share what was in her heart. "Luana," Juliana began, her voice soft but steady, "your father was Matthew, David's twin brother." Her words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of revelation. "Matthew was everything to me. He was kind, loving, the best man I ever knew. When we found out I was pregnant, it felt like we'd been given the greatest gift. But before we could even plan for our future, he was gone." Juliana's voice broke as tears welled in her eyes. She recounted the tragic accident that had claimed Matthew's life, leaving her alone and emotionally shattered. The pain of that loss, compounded by her vulnerability, had created the perfect storm for Margaret and David to execute their cruel plan. "I was so lost," Juliana continued, her voice trembling. "They took advantage of my grief. Margaret convinced me I wasn't capable of raising you, and David, he used my pain against me, twisting it to keep me under their control." Luana listened in silence, her heart heavy as she absorbed this new truth. The knowledge that Matthew, a man she would never know, had been her father filled her with a profound sadness. She grieved not only for him but also for the life Juliana had lost and the years they had been deprived of one another. The revelation stirred a tempest of emotions, anger at Margaret and David, sorrow for her mother's suffering, and a deep yearning for the family she had never truly known. For Juliana, sharing these memories with Luana was both a painful and cathartic step toward healing. For Luana, it was the beginning of understanding her roots, a journey that would demand courage and strength. Together, in that small garden, under the warmth of the sun, they began the difficult process of piecing together their broken lives, knowing that the road ahead would be long but filled with the promise of truth and eventual healing. "I'm so sorry, Mom," Luana said, her voice trembling as she squeezed Juliana's hands tightly. Tears filled her eyes, reflecting the weight of everything they had endured. "I'm sorry for everything you went through, and for everything we lost." Her apology was raw, born from a deep guilt for the years stolen from both of them, years they could never recover. Juliana smiled, a fragile but heartfelt expression that illuminated her face. Despite the unimaginable pain she had endured, sitting beside her daughter now gave her a renewed sense of purpose. "You have nothing to apologize for, my love," she replied, her voice tender. "You are here now. That's all that matters." Henry, who had been silently observing this emotional exchange, stepped forward. His eyes glistened with unshed tears as he placed a comforting hand on both of their shoulders. With a firm yet emotional tone, he vowed, "We will never be separated again. Never again. We'll overcome all of this together, as a family. I promise you." The three of them embraced tightly, a moment of unity forged through shared suffering and the promise of healing. For the first time, they felt like a complete family, bound not just by pain but also by the hope of rebuilding what had been broken. In that embrace, Luana began to accept the complexity of her family's story. The past was full of loss and betrayal, but with the truth now uncovered, there was a chance for redemption and a future built on honesty and love. Though Matthew's absence lingered in their hearts, they found solace in one another. His memory, though painful, became a source of strength, a reminder of the love that had brought them together. Together, Juliana and Luana took the first steps toward moving forward, knowing that healing would take time but also knowing that they were not alone. The days turned into weeks, and as time passed, Juliana's recovery progressed. Under the watchful care of her doctors and with the unwavering support of Henry and Luana, she regained not only her memories but also her inner strength. The shadows of her past still loomed, but with each passing day, the light of hope grew brighter. Conversations with Luana became a source of healing for both of them, each word strengthening the bond that had been cruelly severed but never completely lost. Luana found pieces of herself in Juliana, mannerisms, expressions, and even small quirks she had never noticed before. These discoveries filled her with a newfound sense of identity, a completeness she had never imagined. For Juliana, every shared moment with Luana was a precious gift, a reminder that even in the face of unimaginable loss, love could endure and grow. Henry, after 2 decades of longing, finally found peace in the presence of his daughter and granddaughter. The pain of the past began to fade, replaced by simple joys, shared meals, laughter that echoed through the house, and quiet walks where the family simply existed together. His home, once filled with silence and painful memories, became a sanctuary of life, love, and renewal. Meanwhile, Margaret and David faced the full extent of justice. Both were sentenced to prison for their roles in Juliana's kidnapping and Luana's illegal adoption. Margaret, once again, tried to justify her actions in court, repeating her claims of acting out of love and protection. But her words rang hollow against the stark reality of her crimes. The court, like Henry and Luana, saw Margaret's actions for what they truly were, motivated not by love but by control, selfishness, and an inability to let go of her own insecurities. For Luana, Margaret's imprisonment was a deeply bittersweet moment. The woman who had raised her, nurtured her, and given her a childhood filled with care was now paying the price for choices that had caused irreparable harm. Luana struggled with the duality of her emotions: love for the mother she had always known and anger at the betrayal that shaped her life. To move forward, she knew she had to reconcile these feelings, accepting that Margaret was both the mother who had cared for her and the person responsible for tearing her away from Juliana. Margaret's absence left a void, but it also opened a space for Luana and Juliana to rebuild their relationship without the shadow of deception hanging over them. Slowly but surely, the family began to heal, their shared love for one another offering a path forward. Though the scars of the past would remain, they no longer defined them. Together, they chose to focus on the future, a future where truth, love, and unity would guide their steps. Margaret's imprisonment marked the end of an agonizing chapter in Luana's life, but it also forced her to confront the duality of her feelings. Margaret had been both her protector and the architect of her greatest losses. Accepting this painful truth was not easy, but it was necessary for Luana to move forward. With Margaret and David no longer part of her life, Luana focused on forging a deeper bond with Juliana. Their relationship, though new and fragile, became a lifeline for both of them. The two spent countless hours together, talking about the past and sharing stories of Matthew. Juliana spoke of the dreams she once had for her daughter and how those dreams had sustained her through years of suffering. For Luana, these conversations transformed Juliana from a distant, almost mythical figure into a real mother, one with flaws, fears, and an unyielding love that had endured unimaginable pain. Each story Juliana shared brought them closer, building a bridge over the chasm of time and separation. In Juliana, Luana found an incredible strength and resilience, a well of courage that had helped her survive the darkest moments of her life. And in Luana, Juliana saw a living testament to her sacrifice, a daughter who embodied the love and hope that had never truly left her heart. Their shared pain became a foundation for their healing, binding them together in a way neither had thought possible. One particularly emotional moment came when Luana decided to return to Juliana the necklace that had sparked their reunion. The necklace, a gift from Henry on Juliana's 18th birthday, had been the silent witness to so much loss but also the catalyst for their reconciliation. With trembling hands, Luana approached Juliana, holding the necklace out to her mother. "Mom," Luana said softly, her voice thick with emotion, "I think this belongs to you." Juliana's eyes filled with tears as she took the necklace into her hands. Her fingers traced its delicate curves, and a flood of memories washed over her. It was more than just a piece of jewelry. It was a symbol of Henry's love and a tangible connection to the family she had thought she'd lost forever. Juliana clasped the necklace around her neck, feeling its familiar weight against her skin. She wiped away her tears and smiled through the emotion. "This necklace, it has always been a symbol of my father's love for me. And now, it's so much more. It's a reminder of how, despite everything, we found our way back to each other." She looked into Luana's eyes, her voice trembling with gratitude. "Thank you, my love. You've given me back not only this necklace but also the hope I thought I had lost forever." Henry, who had been quietly watching from a distance, stepped closer. His eyes shone with emotion as he placed a hand on Juliana's shoulder and another on Luana's. "We will never be separated again," he said, his voice steady but thick with feeling. "Never again. We'll face everything together, as a family. I promise you both." The three of them embraced, united by their shared grief but also by the hope of a brighter future. In that moment, Luana felt a shift within herself, a new understanding of her family's complexity and the strength that came from accepting it. The pain of the past remained, but now it coexisted with the possibility of healing and renewal. The memory of Matthew still lingered heavily, but his absence was no longer a void. Instead, it became a source of quiet strength, a reminder of the love that had brought them all together. With time, Juliana and Luana began to find peace, leaning on each other for support as they charted a new course forward. Juliana's recovery continued steadily at the clinic. Each day brought small victories, a memory recalled, a laugh shared, or a quiet moment of reflection. With the unwavering support of Henry and Luana, she regained not just her mental clarity but also her physical strength. The shadows of her past, though ever present, began to recede, making way for a brighter path ahead. For Luana, the journey was one of self-discovery and reconciliation. Through her bond with Juliana, she found parts of herself she had never known, while her connection with Henry gave her the stability and wisdom she needed to move forward. Together, the three of them rebuilt the family that had been stolen from them, proving that even the deepest wounds could heal with love, patience, and the courage to confront the past. Juliana, finally reunited with the fullness of her memories, embraced her second chance with Luana. Each conversation became a thread that wove their bond tighter, a tapestry of connection that had been cruelly severed but never entirely destroyed. For the first time, Juliana felt the joy of truly being a mother, not only sharing her experiences and dreams but also learning about the incredible young woman Luana had become. In turn, Luana discovered pieces of herself in Juliana, gestures, expressions, even a quiet resilience that mirrored her own. This discovery brought her a profound sense of wholeness, something she had unknowingly longed for all her life. Henry, who had carried the weight of Juliana's loss for decades, found solace in their newfound unity. The laughter that once felt impossible now echoed through his home. Family dinners became a cherished ritual, walks outdoors became moments of shared reflection, and even the simplest exchanges were imbued with gratitude. His house, once a silent reminder of everything he had lost, now pulsed with life and the promise of renewal. Meanwhile, justice took its course. Margaret and David, after years of evasion and denial, were sentenced for their crimes. Margaret's attempts to justify her actions in court, pleading that she acted out of love, were met with silence, her words rendered meaningless by the gravity of her deeds. The court, much like Luana and Henry, recognized her actions as selfish and controlling, not the acts of love she so desperately claimed. David, too, faced his punishment, his bitterness and jealousy laid bare for all to see. For Luana, Margaret's imprisonment was deeply bittersweet. The woman who had been her mother, who had loved and cared for her, was also the architect of her greatest losses. Accepting this duality was one of the hardest challenges Luana faced, but it was also necessary. Moving forward meant embracing the truth, no matter how painful. She resolved to honor the love she had received while also acknowledging the damage that love had caused. It was a delicate balance, but one she knew she had to strike. With Margaret and David out of her life, Luana turned her focus to rebuilding her relationship with Juliana. Their long conversations about Matthew, Juliana's dreams, and the life they had both been denied became a cornerstone of their emotional healing. Luana found immense strength in Juliana's resilience, the same strength that had carried her mother through years of trauma and isolation. For Juliana, Luana was proof that her suffering had not been in vain. Together, they began to rebuild what had been lost, creating a bond that grew stronger with each passing day. One day, in a moment filled with emotion, Luana approached Juliana with a necklace that had set their journey in motion. The delicate piece of jewelry, once a symbol of Juliana's bond with Henry, now carried the weight of their shared history. "Mom," Luana said, holding the necklace out, "I think this belongs to you." Juliana's eyes filled with tears as she took the necklace, her hands trembling as she held the piece that had connected her past to her present. The memories it carried, the love, the pain, the hope, overwhelmed her. Slowly, she fastened the necklace around her neck, feeling its familiar weight. "This necklace has always been a symbol of my father's love for me," Juliana said, her voice soft but steady. "And now, it's more than that. It's a symbol of our unity, of how we found our way back to each other despite everything." Nearby, Henry watched with a tearful smile. "It's a new beginning for all of us," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "We've been through so much, but now we can finally heal and move forward together." The three of them, mother, daughter, and grandfather, stood together, no longer bound by the chains of their painful past but united by their love and the promise of a brighter future. The road ahead would have its challenges, but they were ready to face it together. The truth had not only set them free but it also opened the door to healing, rebuilding, and rediscovering the happiness that had once seemed so far out of reach.